Of all the weapons that I expected to be used when it came to geopolitical matters, fishing is not exactly one of them. Yes, my friends, if you're a person who fishes, you may have gone through the hassle and frustration of going to your favorite fishing spot and then realizing that, oh, someone else has discovered it and told all their friends, and suddenly all the fish in that spot have been caught, or at least you cannot really find a spot to get in to actually do what you loved. But what if that didn't just happen to you? What if that happened to your entire country? What if one country came in and stole one of another country's most valuable resources? And what if the country doing so focused on doing it to countries who couldn't really compete with them militarily to stop them? Would the world respond? Well, unfortunately, we actually already know the answers to these questions because that is something that is currently happening and has been happening for years. So, with that, my friends, join us today as we dive below the surface of the global fishing industry and discover the truth behind China's dark and illegal distant water fishing fleet. Because this is a very real problem, and it is something that as time goes on, it is only going to get worse. But first, we do need to plunge into some context before that and get a word from today's sponsor,
Aura. Which is very important, mind you, because I'm sure that for any of you who are watching this right now, any denizens of the internet, you're probably wondering, why the heck is it that I keep on getting flooded with spam calls and emails and things like that? And the answer is because your information is being sold by data brokers out there online. That is why I recommend today's sponsor, Aura, to my friends, followers, and family, because they actually take care of the hard part, automatically removing your info from these sites and keeping it off. Because the thing is, Aura is so much more than just a digital security service. You get alerts if your personal info is found on the dark web, you get real-time fraud alerts for credit and banking, 24/7 monitoring to help keep your identity secure, a secure VPN, antivirus, password manager, and more, as well as US-based support available around the clock if something goes wrong. If something does go wrong somehow, you have up to $5 million in identity theft protection from Aura. So yeah, you're kind of covered. Seriously, there are so many bad actors out there on the internet, and considering how many people I have had that have made threats against me, my friends, my family, and more because of what it is that I do, I cannot let myself be vulnerable, and honestly, you should not either. Make sure to go to my link down in the description and try Aura for free for 14 days. Go to aura.com/history-of-everything, and just by trying it out, you can see for the first 14 days whether or not your data is out there on the internet. Please be safe, my friends. If there is anything that we have shown, the world is a dangerous and very complex place.
So it is, my friends, then, to explain what we were talking about here is illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, which we will now be referring to that throughout the rest of this video as IUU, just so I don't have to say that over and over again, which doesn't necessarily sound inherently all that bad because it's not like you're going and exploding things within another country. And that is sort of true. It is a low-risk, high-reward activity that takes advantage of a fragmented legal framework on the high seas, as well as a lack of effective law enforcement to stop and prevent it. It can include fishing without authorization, ignoring catch limits, operating in closed doors or protected areas, targeting protected wildlife, and fishing with prohibited gear. There's a lot of different things that this can include. And the thing is, these illegal activities can wreak havoc on vulnerable ocean habitats, severely depleting fishing population, and even threaten global food security. It is a very real problem that seemingly comes from something so normal or minor. Now, to be fair, when I am describing it, these kinds of actions are done by fishermen from pretty much every country in the world. But if we focus on the numbers of where they're coming from initially, by far the biggest offender in this category of crime is China, and the numbers are not even close. All things considered, China hauls in over 15 million tons of marine life annually, or 20% of the entire world's total catch. That is ludicrous, and on top of that, it consumes around 36% of total global fish production. Due to this, China operates the world's largest fishing fleet, which is a kind of natural consequence of it, and it has come to be known as the maritime militia as it acts at the behest of the Chinese government. China's armed fishing militia, officially called the People's Armed Forces Maritime Militia, or PAFMM, by the US Department of Defense, is used by Beijing as an instrument in order to assert its sovereignty over disputed territories in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, where these ships will go and intrude into territorial sea around the Japanese or Philippine islands every month. But the thing is, it's not just Asia that they have been plundering either. They're spread out to run fishing boats off of every continent on the planet and in every ocean. Kenya, Madagascar, Mozambique, South Africa, and Tanzania, just those countries alone, are estimated to have lost up to $142 million per year between 2015 and 2021 to illegal fishing of shrimp and tuna within their waters, according to the World Wildlife Fund. Other catches that are taken from these waters include at least 56 different species of sharks and rays and a variety of different reef fish. It was a huge variety, and when Indonesia went and detained Chinese fishing vessels that were close to the Natuna Islands in 2022, the PLAN would react quickly, creating a confrontation that necessitated diplomatic intervention. Similar responses were seen in Sri Lanka, where Beijing was ready to militarize commercial disputes. Anything and everything was on the table to secure that fish. And this is seen pretty much everywhere. Beijing's fleet has recently expanded its activities in the Indian Ocean region, and they're not limited to just fishing. China has a well-documented practice of using its fishing fleet as a maritime militia, with its vessels doubling as military auxiliaries trained by the People's Liberation Army Navy. Around the continent and Indian Ocean region, Chinese fishing vessels avoid detection in a variety of different ways. They will notoriously go in and flag in to African nations, meaning that they use and abuse local rules to assign a foreign-owned and operated fishing vessel to an African registry in order to be able to fish in its local waters. Like, every single thing about the vessel is Chinese, but for some reason it is flying the flag of Mozambique, even though it is doing things on behalf of China. And the problem is not just limited to the Indian Ocean or the South China Sea or anything like that. No, according to estimates by the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, Chinese vessels are disproportionately responsible for the overfishing disaster that has been taking place on Earth, which has adversely impacted almost 34% of the entire world's fishing supply. Tuna, a vital resource for countries like Sri Lanka and the Maldives, is at this point in danger of going extinct in the Indian Ocean. Analysts consider the maritime militia to be China's third sea force, alongside its Navy and Coast Guard. Professor of strategy at the U.S. Naval War College's China Maritime Studies Institute, Andrew Erickson, would dub it, quote, "little blue men," end quote, as these blue-hulled ships would regularly join the Chinese Coast Guard in blockades against the Philippines. Per a maritime law expert in a 2017 interview with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the CSIS, they would say, quote, "the maritime militia is a set of mariners and their vessels which are trained, equipped, and organized directly by the PLA's, People Liberation Army, local military commands. It is active, it is directed, and it is controlled specifically by the Chinese state." As for how bad of a situation we are talking about here, the IUU Risk Fishing Index, which is compiled by the Geneva-based Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, would find that China is by far the worst performing country overall when it comes to illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. This index rates all 152 coastal states across 40 indicators, and it is easily, as I said, the biggest abuser. Now, it's not necessarily like this is something that has been going on forever. Most of this activity began in 2013, when, along with its massive Belt and Road global infrastructure effort, China also merged 5 different civil maritime agencies into the unified Chinese Coast Guard, known as the Maritime Law Enforcement, or MLE. Now, sadly, combined with the fishing boat fleet, these groups have all been heavily suspected of taking part in far more than just their initial activities, including drug and human trafficking. There is significantly more to the story, but for the sake of this argument, we have to really focus on the maritime fishing aspect, because it is huge. China now has, at this point, 57,000 industrial fishing vessels, and according to a study produced by the Global Fishing Watch, an independent nonprofit, that country accounts for 44% of the world's visible fishing activity during this past 3-year period starting from 2022. As for those who are wondering how the hell do they get away with it so much then, the answer is that they've perfected the art of poaching fish from other countries. They will send groups of smaller fishing vessels into the exclusive economic zones of other countries. And then what they do after that is they will send in a mothership, something like the Haifeng 718, which are massive refrigerated transport vessels, to take in that catch. To better imagine this, think about an oil tanker, if you will, but instead of oil, it's full of fish. The mothership can't get stopped and fined because the mothership isn't doing any fishing, it's just collecting from other ships in the area. And the smaller fishing vessels get away with overfishing more than they should be allowed because they can simply offload their catch to the mothership regularly and it disguises how much they caught in any one day. Like basically, if you had a set limit that you were able to do of, I'm just going to say 1 ton or whatnot, something like that, then, oh, you did 1 ton of fish in the morning. They offload it into the mothership. They go back that afternoon. Oh no, we were never fishing this morning. That was a completely different ship. And then they just catch another ton, theoretically doubling the amount of fish that they're able to catch. That is highly illegal, and it is a regular occurrence. And on top of all of that, when they can't illegally poach the fish inside the territorial waters of one country, they will simply do what they did near the Galapagos Islands and mass hundreds of fishing boats right just outside of Ecuador's exclusive economic zone, and from there, harvest everything before it is able to actually reach said economic zone. Now, why Ecuador, you may wonder? Well, that is who owns the Galapagos Islands. So in order to not start crap with Ecuador, the Chinese fleet would station its boats right outside of the Ecuadorian waters, and this would be just so happen to be on the path of the animal migration routes just as they leave protected waters. Now, is this particular kind of fishing illegal? No, it is not. It is in fact completely legal for them to do this, but it is simultaneously incredibly scummy. What was illegal was when in 2017, the Chinese refrigeration vessel Fu Yuan Yuleng 999 was pursued and boarded by Ecuadorian authorities inside the Galapagos Marine Reserve, like they were inside of it. On board, they found a rather gruesome haul. Over 6,000 frozen shark carcasses, many of them endangered species, were discovered and seized. That is illegal on so many different counts. And that's just one example. China, according to the Global Fishing Watch, fished in waters of more than 90 different countries for more than 22 million hours in the 2022 to 2024 period. But China's maritime transgressions are most egregious off the coast, specifically of South America, as that is where some of China's worst offenses on the high seas are committed, because it regularly plunders the rich and abundant waters off the coasts of Chile and Argentina, because that is where it can find some of the world's richest fishing grounds for squid. To explain that, the Chinese distant water fleet catches between 50 to 70% of the world's total deep sea squid catch. Chinese fishing methods and activities within the EEZ of Argentina, Ecuador, and other Latin American countries are highly controversial, as we have covered, because, again, what they will do is oftentimes operate right on the outer borders of several countries, as we have listed with Argentina, Ecuador, Peru, and Chile, thereby targeting migratory species like the giant squid, disrupting their biological cycle. Sometimes they will just go ahead and enter the other country's EEZ and straight up fish there, which, again, there is another word for: poaching. Typically, the way this goes down is that it involves a fleet of fishing boats entering their waters at night and fishing all night long before passing off their haul to the nearest mothership. They then get away with this by turning off their GPS transponders, by changing the name on the side of their boats to pose as local ships, and changing the flag that they fly to pose as local fishermen from a distance to any passing ship or authorities. All of these methods of evasion that we are describing here are wildly illegal according to international maritime law, but the Chinese don't really care. They've got a reputation to defend. You see, with all of these actions, these have caused China to dominate the world's total catch of squid specifically. This is where the motherships come into play in a crucial way, and this is because illegal fishing in general is actually very easy to spot. If you board a ship and you see a pile of shark fins on it, you can be sure that the crew of that ship was illegally fishing for shark fins. But if you stop a boat that is loaded with squid, and it's legal to fish squid in that area, international waters for instance, it's much harder to catch them when they're just underreporting how much they've actually caught. It's the overfishing specifically that China is really getting away with, even more so than the illegal fishing that we have described. In one of the craziest pieces of info that we've heard while researching this, it turns out that China's illegal fishing was responsible for one of the ocean's most interesting mysteries as of the recent years. In the last decade, numerous smaller and ill-equipped North Korean fishing vessels have been washing up on the eastern coast of Japan. Now, these have either shown up empty or containing the bodies of North Korean sailors, and initially it was thought that the Kim regime must have raised quotas for North Korean fishermen. But it actually turns out that China had sent in around 500 fishing vessels into North Korean waters, and they caught so much fish that these smaller, much more outdated North Korean vessels had to fish further out and away from the North Korean mainland in order to be able to catch the same amount. They weren't trying to defect, they just got pushed out by a much bigger operation. And really, that is something that is only possible to do because it is occurring against countries like North Korea, Argentina, Chile, Ecuador, etc. In countries where fishing is much more well regulated, as example, the United States, it's much harder to do this because geographic and species specific regulations govern catch limits, closed areas, fishing seasons, fishing quotas, and permits, minimum maximum fish size, and fishing gear requirements and restrictions. There's so much more that goes into it. In fact, the United States has such well-regulated fisheries because it relies on these science-based management measures that balance resource sustainability while maximizing yield and economic benefit for U.S. fishers. Under the Department of Commerce, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, fisheries conduct scientific research to monitor, protect, and regulate close to 500 different federally managed fisheries, supporting U.S. fishers and the economy. In 2020, the agency's efforts would support 1.7 million jobs and generate $253 billion in seafood sales. This is impressive, and the thing is, most US partner nations do not have the same level of science-based regulatory support, and this makes it much easier for China to poach in and around their waters and get away with it. What is so incredibly difficult when talking about all this is that to prevent overfishing, most fishery management schemes rely on governments or international organizations to control who can fish, when they can fish, how many fish they can take, etc. And from there, they are able to sanction rule breakers. This construct succeeds only if the authority accurately determines the capacity of a common pool resource, unambiguously assigns this capacity, monitors actions, and unfailingly sanctions noncompliance, which is both very expensive and difficult to enact in the real world. And the thing is, even with all of the preventative measures that the United States, as an example, have taken, China has repeatedly encroached into Alaskan fishing waters to try and poach fish and seafood from the US exclusive economic zone. They keep getting caught basically every time they try it, but they still do try it. And this is because Alaskan waters are home to some of the world's highest quality seafood breeding grounds. Now, you may be looking at me here and then say, well, what if we put independent international observers on the fishing boats who are able to monitor this activity? Surely that would stop the underreporting, right? No, not really. And I can tell you why. It's because this has technically already been tried, and it hasn't necessarily been effective. Many national and regional fisheries use fishery observers to assess the health of fish stocks. These observers are marine biologists, and without them, there is no real way of knowing how fish populations are behaving except through fisher anecdote or expensive fishery independent surveys. Observers, however, can be very unpopular with fishers, as they quite literally interfere with their ability to make more money. As for instance, herring fishers from New Jersey and Rhode Island would recently win a US Supreme Court case in which they objected to paying and berthing embarked observers. When fishers are engaged in IUU fishing, their embarked observers are susceptible to extortion and bribery, and on average, at least one observer has died or disappeared under suspicious circumstances each year over the past decade. So, yeah, there is a chance that if this is something that was trying to be attempted worldwide, with places that have significantly more lax rules, those guys would probably all just end up getting tossed overboard in rough water. Another obstacle to prevent IUU fishing is that penalties are oftentimes too low to deter or change behavior in the first place. Fines for skirting regulations are oftentimes lower than fishers' profit margins, and it's commonly difficult for law enforcement officers to even gather enough evidence to prosecute illegal fishing cases in the first place. Many countries, the United States included, require maritime law enforcement officers to physically witness the crime. Maritime domain awareness (MDA) evidence showing a fishing vessel's location is not enough to prove illegal fishing, it actually has to physically be seen. As just one example of the difficulties of enforcement in this issue is the case of Carlos Rafael, who was also known by the absolutely comical alias of the Godfather and owned one of the largest commercial fishing businesses in the entire United States. Rafael was found guilty in 2017 of tax evasion, bulk cash smuggling, falsifying records, and mislabeling fish. After a 4-year investigation, he was sentenced to 46 months in prison, which you can almost guarantee he didn't really serve all behind bars. He was also ordered to pay approximately 400,000 US dollars in fines and restitution, which sounds like a lot, and it is, but in 2011 alone, he reportedly earned close to $370 million. So paying a $400,000 fine was like paying a parking ticket for him. If the United States, which typically has better enforcement, struggles to prosecute and appropriately punish fishing offenders, you can only imagine then how difficult it is to prosecute them in countries with less thorough investigative and judicial institutions. The penalties need to scale up with earnings potential of operation or ships in question, and China is quite frankly not going to do that. The final element of this problem is the use of military force when it comes to resolving fishing disputes. The US Coast Guard believes in proportionate use of force and de-escalation while still compelling compliance. The Chinese Coast Guard, on the other hand, if you've seen the videos in the Philippines and off the coast of Vietnam, etc., no, they don't believe in that. They believe in ramming fishing boats in the South China Sea to try and push around smaller countries, like the Philippines, as demonstrated in the recent near-conflict scenarios throughout 2025 that showed China repeatedly going in and bullying fishing boats in waters that it claimed to be its territory, but no other country on Earth recognizes these claims. On top of that, for the last decade, we've been seeing them go and build artificial islands in the South China Sea, purely to build air bases on and expand their reach and influence in the South China Sea region, as China believes that there is nothing wrong with using its military to solve the problem. But pretty much again, the rest of the world agrees that this should not be a military issue, it's a law enforcement issue. And here's the problem then. Using military forces to solve these smaller disputes only makes the chances of the two parties involved breaking into open conflict, real open conflict, that much more possible. China has essentially been pushing its luck for the last couple of years, and as time goes on and resources become more and more strained, there is a limit eventually that will likely be reached as to how much they can get away with. Which, on that note, this approach may have somewhat blown up in their face because it only strengthened alliances and partner relationships between the US and countries such as Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. The military and strategic relationship that the US has with all these countries has improved since 2013, and drastically so in the case of the Philippines. As just an example of this, over the course of 2025, the US and Philippines have been preparing and building at least 10 military installations at which to stage forces from both countries to keep an eye on the South China Sea and China's relentless and incessant need to push the geopolitical boundaries. Simply due to China's foolish encroachments, the previously damaged relationship between the US and Philippines has almost entirely been restored at this point. And look, when I'm going and talking about this, I don't want it to sound like I am just glazing the United States, because that is absolutely not the case. The US is not a perfect country by any means. Plenty of mistakes have been made, but when talking about this specific issue, when it comes to fishing, China just keeps breaking the rules in the same manner over and over and over again ceaselessly, and it just kind of becomes obvious that when it comes to issues they have a vested financial take in, the Chinese government will always choose profit over doing what is legal. Many countries could try to skirt this. This is far more blatant. So then, looking at all of this here, my friends, what exactly is the answer? Well, unfortunately, it's difficult to say. Countries around the world have to get better at estimating and setting laws for fishing. And no matter which country we're talking about, it's better to keep your military out of the fishing industry law enforcement entirely, and China should be encouraged to do so as well, even if they have no real interest in actually doing so. And that arguably is the greatest problem. China will continue to do whatever it desires, no matter how badly this affects others, because it is the only thing that matters for itself. Theoretically, a combined effort by varying different countries all over the world could do something, but This, again, goes back to the point where there is a reason why China largely focuses its efforts in places that do not have really the ability to fight back. It is not much of a help to say this, but cooperation instead of confrontation is arguably one of the best ways to approach the problem. The issue is that China first has to actually care about stopping the problem in the first place, which it really doesn't. Because what we haven't necessarily specifically mentioned before here is that the Chinese government does know about all of these activities. Absolutely. It is not something that maybe necessarily is strictly ordered, but it is openly supported, funded, and subsidized. And that lies one of the major issues. The large number of Chinese vessels operating long distance is largely due to subsidies that are carried out by the People's Republic of China in recent years. Without subsidies, long-distance fishing would be significantly less profitable. As stated by the U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, quote, without these subsidies, many types of distant water fishing, such as squid fishing, would not be profitable. Beijing not only subsidizes its fishing vessels' activities, but it also supports the modernization and growth of its fleet. For around a decade, China has helped pay for larger and more advanced fishing vessels that can venture further afield. These newer fishing vessels have larger nets, more powerful engines, and feature steel construction compared to older wooden vessels. End quote. And so, therein lies the problem. China is willingly doing this and has to choose to stop, which that doesn't seem like that would happen anytime soon. As it is, my friends, this is the situation that many countries around the world find themselves in, and nothing has really happened now to change that. Of course, in the future, if we go back and revisit this topic, we will come back and give you an update should anything major occur, but right now, at the very least, you understand what has been happening. With that, I know this episode has been rather shorter, but there really isn't much else that we can cover on the topic, but this was something that a number of you in varying different comment sections have requested that we do go and talk about. So, to all of you who requested it, you're welcome. Please let us know in the comment section below what it is that we should cover here next. Thank you all very much for watching, and I know as we are doing this at the beginning of January of 2025, a lot of things happened in the world, which you can guarantee that we're going to be making videos on here soon. Not going to spoil it, but you all know from my page and the posts that I've made and the memes that have been posted that things happened. The things never happen crowd are being beaten the F out. Thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you all here next time. Goodbye, my friends.